Okay, we'll start. Good evening. As most all of you know, I'm sure, my name is Susan Lessard, and I have the good fortune to be the town manager for the town of Bucksport. It is my pleasure to welcome you this evening to the presentation of the final A.D.A.P.T. plan that has been in the works for more than a year. This presentation is being recorded, and it will be located on the town's website as a link and also available on the local cable channel, thanks to the efforts of Jim Morrill and the RSU 25 IT team. So thank you very much, Jim, for making this possible so that people who could not be here this evening will also be able to see this presentation. And I also want to take a moment, because I never have this opportunity, to thank our Economic and Community Development Director, Rich Rotella, for his efforts on behalf of this community. Not just with this A.D.A.P.T. plan, but in his tireless efforts to promote Bucksport. Rich does a great deal of the heavy lifting behind the scenes when it comes to making things happen, and we are very fortunate to have him. So A.D.A.P.T. A.D.A.P.T. stands for AIM Development Action Plan for Tomorrow. And it's a plan funded by an EPA area-wide planning grant that was facilitated by the Eastern Maine Development Corporation on behalf of Bucksport. The plan is the collaborative effort of many people, including many of you in the audience who participated in the public session in the fall of 2017 and the spring of 2018. It has been coordinated by our project consultant, a land consulting, architecture, and engineering. And this evening, they will be walking you through the plan and its components. The plan contains input from a wide variety of sources, and it reflects the ideas and the vision that many people shared during this process. The residents of Bucksport emerged from the closure of the mill with the resolve to create a bright and prosperous future for the community. 4 years later, here we are. We have a community that continues to work hard for its future, a community that is reinventing itself while it stays true to the core values and belief that makes this community so special. There is momentum here as we look forward to the location of a world-class land-based aquaculture facility with whole oceans, a world-class educational facility with Maine Maritime Academy's Mariner Training Institute, a state-of-the-art power plant facility, potential port development, all at the former mill site. The plan to be discussed here tonight builds on all of that and more. I would now like to introduce Amy Jean McCown, who's the EPA program officer that has worked with us on the development of this plan. She will discuss the planning grant program, and following that, introduce the rest of our agenda. Thank you.
I'm a little shorter than Susan, and you guys are really fortunate to have Susan Lessard as your town manager. I've worked with lots of town managers in Maine, and for some reason, a lot of them are women, so it's nice. And as she said, I'm Amy Jean McEwen. I'm from Boston, and I'm just going to go over a couple points about this grant. This was a competitively awarded grant to EMDC, Eastern Maine Development Corporation, and the catalyst site was the former VERSO paper mill. This round of grants were the last rounds of area-wide planning grant that EPA is giving out. We no longer will have this one grant for $200,000 to do this type of work, which is sad because so much work was done with this pot of money. So how the grant works is The big part, even though they show them similar circles up here, the green and the blue and the red, community engagement is a huge part of this grant. Having the public meetings, having interviews, putting surveys out, getting comments on reports, that's a big part. So we have community engagement and partnerships. Then the brownfield site, we already had the site. We didn't have to evaluate, figure out what site it was. And because EMDC had assessment money and Hancock County had assessment money and the Penobscot Indian Nation had assessment money, we were able to use those pots of money plus another funding from EPA to do all of the assessment work that was needed at this site, which is unique. A lot of times you're just doing planning and you don't have any assessment funding. And so with this funding for this area-wide planning grant, we evaluated the existing conditions. We did an infrastructure analysis, exactly what we have there, and also a market study. And the market study wasn't just for the piece of property, but it was for the area, for the town, what other businesses would be a good fit here, what other businesses are missing from this area, and what would complement Whole Oceans. And then as a result, we came out with the Brownfields area-wide plan and the implementation. And we spent a lot of time over the implementation, and that's the big part, because we don't want the plan to be so attractive it just sits on a shelf and no one actually does anything. So the whole point is that we have implementation. What are we going to do after this plan? Like after the meeting's done, what's Mike Ludwig going to do? I mean, he's going to tell us after I stop talking, but he will do something, and what he has to do is the implementation. Who else is going to be involved with that? Rich Vitella, Susan Lassard, other members of the community, and that is the end. So even though we have this culmination meeting, there's still work to be done to fulfill all the work that we did in the Brownfields area-wide plan. So that's it for my part, and now I'm going to introduce Mike Ludwig. He was the project officer for this grant, and he's with Eastern Maine Development Corporation.
Change the slide. Good. All right, so the only thing between this and getting on with it is me, so I'll get on with this fairly quickly. I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview about Eastern Maine Development Corporation. We've been in existence for over 50 years. We're dedicated to entrepreneurship, community, economic, workforce development efforts in the region. We help businesses, towns identify barriers, challenges, opportunities that help our region thrive. Can everybody hear me okay? So one of the tools that we use at Eastern Maine Development Corporation are the Brownfields, EPA Brownfields program. This grant that funded this A.D.A.P.T project was one of only 19 that were awarded nationwide at this round. So how did Bucksport qualify for this? What made the difference? It all started with many of you in the room here tonight and the community in general. There's a broad base of community support, and when the mill announced that they were closing, the town very quickly responded and formed new organizations. It's Main Street, Heart and Soul, Bucksport Next, and that gave us great ammunition along with the wonderful leaders in the town to make a strong case and a strong application, and as a result this project was funded. So once we had the funding, the first thing that we did was form an advisory committee. And the advisory committee is made up of a broad base of stakeholders: the mill property owner, AIM, the town leaders, Hancock County Planning Commission, a lot of the organizations I mentioned, Heart and Soul, Main Street, Bucksport Next, a broad base of stakeholders. The first order of business for the committee was to come up with a name, which was A.D.A.P.T Bucksport, which is, as Susan said, the AIM Development Action Plan for Tomorrow. So the second order of business was finding a consultant. EMDC has a lot of experience with that, and we helped with the administration of issuing a request for proposals. And from those, we selected 3 different firms to interview. And from those interviews, we elected Alon as the lead consultant on this project. And they have just done a fabulous job for us. So, in getting the information for this project, they relied on a lot of different sources, but it included some of the resources right here. The Eastern Maine Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, the SEDS plan, our Re-Engineering the Region has a region guide to economic development efforts in Eastern Maine, and there are other statistical and demographic reports that Eastern Maine Development was able to run. So we want to continue to support the efforts here with the resources and services available through Eastern Maine Development that include workforce development. It includes a program called Procurement Technical Assistance, which helps small businesses contract with government agencies, and in any other ways that we can help fill gaps. So you've formed a great foundation. You're on a good track for revitalizing the area, and just have our heartfelt congratulations on that. A lot of communities are looking for ways to be intentional about their future and their growth, and a lot are looking to Bucksport already to see what's already happened here and what's happening. So something to be very proud of. There's still a lot of work to do, but the foundation is here. So with that, I'd like to introduce Lisa Nagel. She is the principal with Alon.
I too am not as tall as Susan, but let's see. Good evening, everybody. My name's Lisa Nagel. I'm with Alon Planning and Design. Can everybody hear me if I kind of step over this way so I don't have to be behind a screen and a microphone? But if I do this, is this okay? I am here with Dan Stevens, and he and I are going to share the bulk of the presentation as we go through and share this plan with you. Just before we get started, I just wanted to share a little bit of background about who we are. We hail from Saratoga Springs, New York, which is just north of Albany, which is the capital of New York, about half an hour north of there. And I always say that's a nice place to rest our head at night. We actually travel around New York State and around the country doing this very type of planning process. We go into communities that have formerly used properties, such as a paper mill, or out in Pittsburgh, Kansas, we did a similar process for a facility that made clay pipe. And communities are looking and say, what do we do with these? These are great assets in our community, and how do we move them forward? And the EPA area-wide planning process, which is sadly did not get funded in this next administration, is a grant that allows the communities to dive deep and understand what's happening in the community, to do extensive public outreach, which is what we've done, to work with the community and the stakeholders to develop a vision for the future, the redevelopment of these often complex properties. In this case, AIM, the property the owner of the property, has been a participant all along, and that's been wonderful. And we've been able to work with that. Of course, since we started this, we have Whole Oceans. We have some Whole Oceans representatives here with us this evening. And then Maine Maritime. So there's already some momentum going, and we are going to share with you this plan, and we move it forward. And I'd like to sort of say too is sort of the why. Why do we do these things? And we believe in helping communities. The community of Bucksport has been so impressive to us since the day we came here, and the passion that you all have for this community. When that paper mill closed, you didn't even look back. You went forward, and we were talking earlier with Susan, and a lot of communities sort of get a little steam of momentum and then stop. You don't. You kept moving forward with the Chamber, with Heart and Soul, Bucksport Next, and all the other entities, and I don't want to try to list them all because there's so many, and I'll leave somebody out. But it's been impressive and wonderful to work with, and being able to help prepare this plan for the implementation as we move forward has been quite an honor, and we're happy to do that. So we're going to talk a little bit about the project background and share with you what we learned. And this is what we learned from you, from our individual interviews. We met with groups, individuals, and when we did the 2 open houses. We're going to share with you the vision. What is the vision for the A.D.A.P.T project site? Very quickly, what's happening today, a little bit of the existing conditions. And we're really going to hit the highlights. I brought up with here, we have out on the table 11 by 17 fold summary of the plan. The plan, as Amy Jean said, isn't very thick, and there's a lot of pictures. It's fun to read. It went live today on the town's website and on the A.D.A.P.T website. So out on the table where you came in addition to the summary of the plan, is a little sort of postcard with the A.D.A.P.T website on it. So if you want to grab one of those and go home, you'll be able to read the plan online on either the town's website or on the A.D.A.P.T website. So the purpose of tonight is really kind of hit the highlights. We're not going to go too deep in the weeds, and you'll see that. Whole Oceans came, and that was great. We're going to show you how we leverage that into this project. And then we're going to hit just the priority recommendations. We're not going to hit every single one. And then we're going to talk about the implementation, as Amy Jean said. How do you get it done? Tonight is a presentation of the plan, but there's a lot of work in front of everyone. And then we'll have some time for some questions. The intent is to go for about another 40 minutes, and then we'll break, and out in the hallway are boards with the recommendations on it, some illustrations of the plan for the A.D.A.P.T site, and some other information, and we'd like to have you peruse the boards, and we'll be there. You can ask us any more detailed questions if you don't have any questions at the end of this presentation. So, how did we get there? We started in the summer of 2017, and as Mike said, we had a steering committee that was great to work with as we moved through. In the fall of 2017, we had a public open house, and the purpose of that was, there's no bad ideas. What do you want to see on this site? And everybody could provide their input. We also asked what your vision was for the future of this site, and we're going to share that with you. Through the winter and into the spring, we were working back in our shop, analyzing the data. Dan is our economist. He's the project manager, but he's also an economist, and he was able to sort of dive into some of the information that we were provided and came up with some great recommendations. So we came back in the spring, it was really June, we came back and did the open house, and both the open houses were right on Main Street, great facility, where we shared those recommendations, and we asked you sort of thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs sideways, did you like it, did you not, did we miss anything? We were able to share the master plan and get feedback, and that was all really critical information that we took back to the steering committee, and through the summer till today, refined the plan and came up with a plan. So what did we learn, in particular from the public open houses? We've already talked about this in terms of who we met. We also did have an online public input survey. We do have that. We do have the website and a Facebook page. And again, if you just want to grab one of the postcards out by the door, you can get the A.D.A.P.T website. So what did we learn from the community? So there's a variety of, public input is critical in terms of doing this. There are individuals that we interviewed, and at the open house, you all came in. And I'm not going to read these verbatim because I don't read slides verbatim, but in general, people want to see job creating. It's an industrial site, and you're okay with that in the community. It's a history of the site, and we recognize that it can be reused to generate jobs. But you love Bucksport. So whatever happens, you don't want to change the character of Bucksport. You don't want to change who you are. You certainly want to continue to grow and to continue to be who you are, and you're welcoming of new people, but you don't want to outright change the character of who you are. You are a year-round community. There aren't many year-round communities in this area of Maine because of again, where you are geographically located. Main Street rang true, right? Through everybody has, a passion for Main Street, your waterfront walkway. And then, the last piece of this is like, yes, we want that site redeveloped, but we want it to look good, right? We don't want it to detract from the beautiful character of our community. And those were important pieces that we heard. There is a lot of public information, and it is all summarized in that report, but these are some of the highlights. So then we asked you, what's your vision for the future? What would you like to see on this site as we move forward? And if some of you came to the open house, we asked in 3 to 5 words, what would you like this area to look like? And you all provided a whole host of information. Some people would put agree on a post-it and put an arrow next to another post-it. Some people put other dots and sort of like this, I like this idea. And we were able to pull all this together, work with the steering committee, and come up with a vision for the A.D.A.P.T. Website. This is the only slide I'm going to read because that's how important the vision statement is. The A.D.A.P.T. area is an economic engine at the head of the Penobscot Bay that respects its past while looking to the future as an ongoing source of community pride, identity, and economic vitality. Bucksport welcomes partnerships with industries that provide jobs in clean, resilient, and diversified businesses. Prosperous enterprises using the area's rich set of assets are located adjacent to high-capacity power generation and an active port of regional significance. The area is integrated with the town of Bucksport in a manner that sustains the long-standing and established community spirit and character for current and future generations. These are your words, not ours. This is what the collective community has told us. This is the future of the A.D.A.P.T. Area and the community as a whole. And so with this vision statement, sort of everything flows, right? So I'm going to share with you goals, and we're going to share with you recommendations, and everything comes back to this vision, because if we implement this vision in the long term, then we're successful. And, you know, the economic engine, economic vitality, clean, diversified businesses, community spirit and character, that all goes not just to the A.D.A.P.T. website, but to Main Street or the Waterfront Walkway or your neighborhoods, and you're going to see some of those themes ring true through the report. We also had 5 goals. So we start with the vision statement, and we have goals, and the recommendations flow out of these goals. So the goals are important to also pay attention to. The first one is talking about a diverse and resilient economic growth in the town and the region. The second one is to utilize and improve the assets of the project area, power generation, port, rail, et cetera. Clean industries and uses. Promote high-quality design. Again, these are elements that flowed out of the public input. And support and enhance the quality of life in Bucksport. So these broad goals then drove a series of recommendations, and Dan and I are going to walk through those with you as we walk through this presentation. So Dan and I, so you don't have to hear just one person's voice for so long, we're going to split this presentation. Dan's going to talk a little bit about the existing conditions that we learned in our inventory. I'll just stay up here. It's easier. Dan's also has a cold, or he's getting over a cold, so I may have to step in. I'm gonna stand.
You'll have to forgive my sniffles. So as Lisa mentioned, as part of this effort, we began with an extensive research and analysis phase. And so, we call this the existing conditions analysis. And, what do we look at as part of that? And the short answer is, anything and everything that may have relevance for the redevelopment of this area. But these are some of the specific things. And as you, get your hands on a copy of the report, you will see all this in greater detail. And there's a robust technical appendix if you feel up to the challenge. But demographics, what are the trends in Bucksport, and what does that mean in terms of what the community needs, and what issues it may be facing down the line? Physical conditions and infrastructure. You see a graphic of the site there. This is not a simple site. There's quite a bit going on in terms of the buildings and infrastructure that are there, above ground, below ground, and then also surrounding the site. We don't look at the site, by itself. We also look at the surrounding context. Zoning and land use. Zoning, what can be built there? Are the existing town regulations, adequate for what the end vision for the site is, and do those potentially need to be updated? Land use, specifically the context of this site. This site is not that far from residential areas. It's not that far from the Main Street commercial areas, and those have real implications when you're talking about industrial redevelopment. Environmental and brownfields conditions. This is a brownfields redevelopment project, and of course brownfields is all about contaminated land, or the perception of contaminated land. And so that is something that we looked at in terms of what it means for potential constraints for the redevelopment of this area. Port feasibility was something that was one of our charges, and we had a port expert that we worked with as part of our team to look at the market opportunities to have a functioning deep water port as part of the project area. And then economic and market opportunities. You know, what are the specific redevelopment opportunities for this site based on local and regional economic and market conditions and trends? And so we did a lot of number crunching and looked at the industry data and talked with quite a few experts at the local, regional, and state levels to identify what those opportunities are for the site. So what did we learn from the analysis? Certainly more than 4 bullet points, but we'll give you the highlights. The physical and market opportunity exists for a port, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we get into the discussion of the master plan for the site. But that was significant, that there is you know, a real opportunity to have something here in Bucksport that's a vibrant and active port. The research identified specific target industries for redevelopment for the site that are, you know, a good fit for Bucksport and this site based on the infrastructure, based on local, regional, state, economic, and market trends. In terms of the brownfield constraints, there was a parallel effort along with this A.D.A.P.T project to examine the brownfield conditions of the site through an environmental site assessment. And as part of that, that revealed that there are not the you know, the types of environmental issues that you might expect with a site like this. It's certainly one of the great advantages of this site in terms of its brownfield situation. You know, there's no known substantial brownfield constraints, which you know, is a positive thing that allows a company like Whole Oceans to come in and not have that extra barrier to entry in terms of locating in a community and a site like this. And the infrastructure assets, you know, make the site uniquely competitive. This site has a set of assets that are really unparalleled, from anything from, you know, the rail spur to fresh water supply, and of course power, gas, and pretty much anything that you could ask for an industrial site, you know, we're fortunate to have with the A.D.A.P.T project area. So, as you are all aware by now, there was a not so minor announcement during the course of this project in the form of Whole Oceans, a state-of-the-art aquaculture facility. And here you see artist rendering that Whole Oceans has made public. And as you can see, it's a substantial part of the A.D.A.P.T project area. That building footprint is about 8.5 acres. And so, you know, at this point, you know, this is obviously a tremendous benefit and positive development for not only the town, but for this project, because it allowed us to shift our focus and do some extra things that we may not have been able to do otherwise. So, you know, with a project like Whole Oceans, you know, a real use that provides an anchor for redevelopment. And so what does that mean, an anchor for redevelopment? You know, it's something that we can build around with a Whole Oceans project. You know, it creates a number of additional opportunities. This is, you know, an emerging land-based aquaculture industry. And with that industry, which is expected to be a substantial industry of the future in Maine, that will create a lot of spin-off impacts in terms of other industries that are attracted, other types of businesses. And I'll go ahead here because these are the opportunities that we look to identify after Whole Oceans made their announcement. And one of the things that we did was we looked at the aquaculture supply chain. So what is that? It's the companies that sell and provide goods and inputs to aquaculture companies like Whole Oceans. And then it's on the other side of things where, there are businesses and other consumers that are purchasing the products of Whole Oceans. And so, for example, that are purchasing the salmon and making value-added food products. So we looked at the supply chain to identify other economic opportunities for the town of Bucksport. And there are several that we identified that are a great opportunity for Bucksport. As a community, you're here at ground zero, essentially, of this emerging industry, and there's a real opportunity to take advantage of that and be proactive in capitalizing on those opportunities. So you see here the redevelopment opportunities that are supportive and complementary. Obviously, Whole Oceans takes up a large portion of the project area, but not the entire project area. And so we look to identify the uses that would be a good fit. So if the project area is a puzzle, and we start with Whole Oceans, what are those other pieces of the puzzle that fit in well with Whole Oceans? And there's an example right there, housing and services for future workers at Whole Oceans and on the project area site. Economic development opportunities. So it's those other types of businesses and industries that are a good fit with aquaculture. And this includes things like job training and community marketing. We'll talk a little bit more about marketing, but there is an opportunity here as Whole Oceans establishes its operations. And everyone's kind of got their focus and eyes on Bucksport. There's an opportunity for the town to, present itself to the world and, as embracing of this new industry. Real estate market and development opportunities. With a significant project like this, there may be an opportunity to move the needle in terms of the real estate market. So things that might not have been feasible to develop before, may in fact become feasible. And we looked at what some of those things are in terms of new businesses and other development opportunities. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to walk you through the master plan for the A.D.A.P.T project area.
Okay, so with that background, so we have public input, we have a vision, we have goals, we have a Whole Oceans announcement. Now, and as Dan said, there's a puzzle that we began to build around Whole Oceans on the site. And this is what we call a master plan graphic. These are sort of not fixed lines. This is a conceptual idea of how the remainder of the site could be used in a complementary way to Whole Oceans locating there. And I'm just going to walk through some of the different components of this, and then we're going to take sort of a deeper dive into certain sections of this area. And these, by the way, are what's on the boards out in the hallway. So when we're done, you can get a closer look right up close on the easels. As it says, this is sort of an aspirational plan. So we, again, taking the input from everybody and the analysis of the existing conditions, we were able to conceptualize the future redevelopment with the property owners at the table. And I would like to recognize a couple of Whole Oceans, Jen Fortier and Joe, and are here this evening. And Jen was actually sat on our committee. When Whole Oceans made the announcement, she jumped right in and came to our committee meetings and has helped prepare this plan. And so that's the partnerships that are created in this community that make this plan invaluable going forward. So what we're looking for, or what we're seeing, is there's a mix of a whole bunch of sort of supportive uses that can achieve that vision, right? So we're going to go back to the vision, and how they're going to link together to downtown, as Dan mentioned, and as you know, Main Street and downtown isn't that far away from this site. I don't have a pointer, do I? I don't think so. Maybe I can do this. There we go. Okay. I'm going to start up here. North is obviously up. I mean, this isn't going to work too good, but Route 15 comes down right into the community. So on the bottom of this graphic would be the connection to Main Street. In fact, there's a green line on the lower right-hand corner. That's where your existing waterfront walkway terminates currently. You'll see, I'm going to start at the bottom because it's sort of the easiest. You'll see the fuel dock there. As we come in, you're going to see an area that says enhanced port. Through our analysis and with our port expert and with your location on the Penobscot River and Bay and the deep water flowing through here, there is an opportunity, and working with A.M., the property owner, they're retaining ownership of this. We do see an opportunity for the port, and that's one of the areas we're going to take a little deeper dive here in a second. There's a small blue box that looks like a T. Those are the existing power generation facilities. That's obviously a huge asset. As Dan mentioned, the infrastructure assets to the site are unparalleled. Its location, power, water, freshwater, saltwater, rail, though we know the rails need to be upgraded, but there's huge assets to the site, and power being a primary one. The next little red area says Marine Campus. This is the idea of a Marine Campus, and as we were working through this process, we were seeing some type of complementary use, whether it's job training, whether it's education, whether it's a teaching school or what have you. We have this idea of this Marine Campus. And that is also the area where the Maine Maritime Academy is looking to locate. Continuing on, so all the sort of bluish teal, that's largely what Whole Oceans has purchased with their primary land-based aquaculture facility in the middle. The green dots that you see coming through there, again, conceptualized. But one of the things that the public has said through this process is they'd really like to see the opportunity for the waterfront trail to continue through that site. And Whole Oceans has heard that loud and clear, and they're excited about that too, and are going to look at that. As we continue up north, there's the former, well, it's not former, but the Sprague property, commonly referred to, I should say, is the Sprague property. We just identify that as perhaps that's an area of future opportunity. We didn't go too deep in what that opportunity is on that, but we do recognize it as a waterfront site in the town, possibly used, perhaps for industry, because you do have the rail lines that sort of separate it from that property from the main road. There's an at-grade railroad crossing, and then it kind of heads down to the water. But the dolphins are still in the water, and so there may be some opportunity there. I'm going to jump across the street, and that sort of light green triangle area is what we're looking at as perhaps a housing opportunity, and that would be just on the north side of the power lines. That's what that sort of gray line is, the separation to the brown area. Those are the power lines that come through town. Continuing down, there's the purple area where we are looking at expansion of potential industrial uses. And then the landfill behind there. The landfill is going to be continuing to be owned by A.M. and used by them. There's economic opportunity for them. It's a construction debris landfill, and they're going to continue to use it as such. So let me talk about a couple of areas. This is the area, let me back up once. So this is from the port, the Marine Campus, and Whole Oceans. And we were able to, with our design team, sort of take a pretty deep dive into what could this look like. And so what did we hear from you? We heard about quality design and having diversified uses on this site, not sustainable uses and not negatively impacting the community. So looking at all of that, again, I'll probably start at the bottom. So we have the fuel dock on the lower right-hand corner. We'll talk about more about the port, but the port we're seeing as an opportunity in a couple of phases. The port can exist as it is. There would need to be some upgrades to the wooden wharf that's there. But long-term, there may be an opportunity to create more land area for storage of materials, bulk commodities materials, if Log Pond could be filled. Now, we understand that's a big lift, and we have regulatory requirements, et cetera, et cetera. But if there's an economic opportunity to be there, in fact, it was land back in the day, we understand, but it was excavated when logs came in for the paper-making process. Continue on north of that, with the port, we are also showing the rail coming in, so upgrading the rail is a key need here, but that port can also happen with truck movement as well. Continuing north, this is sort of the marine campus, and that's just what it is, you know, a campus in air quotes. There's sort of a common road that comes in, adequate parking, buildings that could be a variety of uses, and you'll see maybe a visitor center, you know, to interpret aquaculture and the recirculating air systems, the RAS system that Whole Ocean's going to be using as, you know, one of the best and leading examples in the world, which is a true statement. We have AIM offices are going to be retained there. And then, you know, we say marine technologies and services, again, working with the Maritime Academy that perhaps they can come to this area. On the right-hand side of the road, you'll see facility gateway. That was one of the important pieces, too. What people were saying is when you come into Bucksport from the north, it should look good, it should feel welcoming, it should be a gateway, and we recognize that. So we're paying attention to sort of the edge of the road, understanding the railroad tracks are right there, but the edge of the road, and what's the feeling, how welcoming is the community as you come in? And as you continue north, we have the Whole Oceans, you know, area approximate. Of course, they're about to start a deeper dive into their design and site planning and all of that. So this is approximate for what we have through here. So here's the port. The top image is what we're envisioning is phase one in the short term. You'll see the, you know, as it says, start small to minimize the risks, improve the market. We do have area there in sort of the throw-off area, if you will, or bulk commodities that could be used. You'll see the large ship and then a small dock, which is called a spud barge, which would be attached to that wooden wharf. We understand that that wooden wharf probably isn't adequate enough for a large ship, so you'd need some type of improvement to hold a larger vessel. And we're looking at bulk aggregates as a potential market opportunity there. In the long term, expanding that footprint by using Log Pond, and that's really driven by the economy. You know, if and when there's a market to make this happen, then we're saying that this is really a sort of a long-term vision. But we are seeing the opportunity for a port in the short term. It's this configuration, as we've indicated. On the other side of the road, where we had the workforce housing that I mentioned, that's the graphic on the left. And the power lines would be sort of that diagonal line on the right-hand side there. But looking at new homes, Bucksport has beautiful neighborhoods. There's not a lot of new construction for housing that's happening in Bucksport. This could be an area for that. We purposely sort of, what we say, clustered them or put them together on sort of the northern portion of this property, and the sort of western, southern portion would be more wooded, because you do have the power lines there, and that's, you know, perhaps people don't want to live near the power lines. But if you cluster these homes together, it's opportunity for new housing, for workers to Whole Oceans or other industries that might come to Bucksport, and then also a trail and a buffer to those power lines. And then just south of there, also along the road, would be what we call sort of an industrial pad site, if you will, a new development site on Route 15. And again, this could be complementary industries to Whole Oceans or a related type of industry that can go there. And this is important too. Again, we talked about that gateway as you come into Route 15. You see these buildings are sort of pulled up to the road, the parking's behind. So if you have sort of nicely designed industrial buildings, you're not just seeing sort of sea of cars, you can see some interesting, architecture. And also, when you read the report, you'll see that when we talk about this site, we talk about sort of what we call green technologies, where we're talking about rain gardens and different ways to treat stormwater to be environmentally friendly in this area. And that's all talked about in the report and pointed out with all those small words that we can't read. This is just an aerial image of what I was just showing you. Again, starting with the port on the lower right-hand corner with the fuel dock and coming into the marine campus. Excuse me, this is a little faded out, but we do have out on the easel a large printout of this that you can look at. The idea is to really kind of, it's an exciter sketch. It's the way to articulate. Not everybody can sort of read a map, but we're trying to articulate what the possibilities are here, keeping in mind all of the different aspects that we heard from the public in terms of how you all feel the site should be built out. Can I keep going? Or you do this? Can you keep going? Okay. So that's the master plan. Now I want to talk about when we were putting together the recommendations, there are numerous ones. So we said, what are the priority recommendations for this plan? And we want to hit some of the highlights for you as we go forward. As it says, highlights. And all the recommendations relate back to the goal, which relate back to the vision statement, right? So the first goal was to talk about diverse and resilient economic growth in the town and region. The town is very happy to have whole oceans, but what we also heard is that we want to make sure that we have other aspects of life happening, right? So that it's a complete community. We're not relying on one industry, i.e. a paper mill, but we want to make sure that we have a diversified life in Bucksport, not just industrial and jobs and economy, but in this case, we're talking about Main Street. So we talked about the marine campus. Dan talked a little about marketing and business attraction. The Main Street district that better embraces the river and expanded waterfront park. I want to talk about that because that relates to the graphic on the bottom of the page. Main Street runs along the top of this. North is to the left. The docks on the bottom right are your current marina. And it's a little bit hard to see, but we're showing a potential expansion of the marina. That was desired, and we see a market opportunity for more slips at the current marina. We also look in the middle of the marina, you'll see that it says marine restaurant with event space. That's the current location of your marina operations. And we're seeing, that could be maybe a little bit more, right? You could maybe have a restaurant there. It's right on the waterfront. We could have some interpretive signage. We can have, different events happening there. And then just above that would be your Historical Society building. And there was an idea by some folks at the Historical Society to perhaps lift that building up so it was on level with Main Street, keeping them there, but perhaps expanding other uses within that building, more of a museum that people could come when they come to Bucksport and come and learn about the history of Bucksport and all the different aspects of the community could happen in that building along with your Historical Society. That could be a really neat space for people to visit. Continuing on, this, in the center is that large gray area with a P. That's the current parking area, right? So when you go down, you go to the waterfront, this is where you're parking. And then you do have your waterfront walkway that continues on up to the fuel dock. What this graphic is suggesting is working with Pan Am to remove those railroad tracks that are there and use that space for an enhanced park along your waterfront. And there's various aspects to that and much detail that I'm not going to spend too much time on. Things from like an amphitheater so people can come and enjoy the water. We do know that you have the concerts back at the lighthouse. Perhaps this could be a complementary activity to that. One key interesting thing is you see iconic public art or public art. These are large pieces of art, not dissimilar to the granite statue that you have back by the marina, but very large pieces. So when somebody's over in the observatory on the bridge, they can look over and go, wow, what's that? What's going on over there? And they come down from the observatory, they come across the bridge, and they make that left, right? And they come into Bucksport. So we see really great opportunity with this potential park and then extending that walkway into the A.D.A.P.T site. The next goal was to utilize and improve the assets of the project area. We talked about the port. We talked about the rail infrastructure. The rail line really is not usable from Bucksport up to Bangor, where it would hit the main rail line. So there is a recommendation in the report to work with Pan Am, the rail owner, to improve that rail infrastructure. Is it necessary, needed, not right away? Would it be helpful to attract additional businesses and help expand that port? Yes. So that's a key piece of that. Fiber optic is something the town's been working on and has gotten state grants, and we continue to say that we should do that. And then extending the wastewater infrastructure, so extending sewer and water north on Route 15 to that workforce housing area could help develop that area. Let me just keep going. Dan's going to talk about some of these other recommendations.
So the third goal we have here is to incorporate clean industries and uses. That was something that you all as a community came out and told us very clearly that it was something that you wanted through the open house events that we had and the online survey. And so the plan includes recommendations on how to encourage green design for new development, including alternative energy such as solar. And you see there an example of solar panels on an industrial building. And then the image below that, an attractive kind of a stormwater management park area. Limiting the potential negative impacts of trucks on Main Street. That's another theme of this plan is, encouraging new economic and industrial growth without sacrificing, the charm and vibrancy of Main Street. And so the plan addresses, how to approach that. And then an online information portal for the Silver Lake water system. That was something, again, that we heard from you all as a community and other folks from outside of Bucksport, because we're talking about a regional water system, really interested in having more access to information about how that water is used and how your concerns about that water system is being addressed. The fourth goal, promoting high quality design, creative building approaches. So how do we encourage new development, new businesses to not have ugly shed buildings that are plain and not very attractive? And some ideas there, facades, different ways that you can use materials and other design elements on the fronts and sides of buildings, lighting, murals, even night projections were something that was discussed in the plan. The public art campaign, including Adopt-A-Fish, that's one of my personal favorites. And this is all about, again, embracing whole oceans and this new identity as the home of one of the world-class salmon, indoor salmon facilities. And so, what is Adopt-A-Fish? And that image you see there is a good example of it. And this is something that other communities have done, not necessarily with fish, but, for example, we're from Saratoga Springs, and our big thing is horses. And so when you drive around Saratoga, you see different horses placed outside of businesses, and they've been artistically designed and painted by different local artists. It's kind of something that's unique, and it really helps build the identity of a place. And so wouldn't it be great if there were fish like these, salmon, painted by local artists, around the community, outside of local businesses, on the waterfront? And wouldn't that be a great way to bring in, new folks, new visitors who patronize local businesses on Main Street, while also helping to build this identity as the home of whole oceans. The Main Street Streetscape project, you'll see there is a priority project. And so this recommendation includes a number of things. includes things like fixing sidewalks and adding sidewalks. It means adding bicycle amenities, so Main Street is a little friendlier to bike along. And it includes other elements like landscaping, street furniture, benches, these types of things. There's a real opportunity and need for this type of project, and this, of course, would involve working with Maine DOT. Is this a state corridor? But that's something that the DOT does with local communities. And so, the idea behind this is that it not only improves safety and the look and feel of this Main Street corridor, but it provides, a unified streetscape, a unified appearance between Main Street and to the project area, so that it's a unified experience as you walk, bike, or drive along Main Street and Route 15. You feel that it's a continuation of the same place. Upgraded community gateways. Lisa touched a little bit on this. In that bottom image, you see how one community has used public art to enhance their gateway area. And gateways are really all about creating a sense of arrival into a unique place. And there's an opportunity to have stronger and more unique gateways here in Bucksport, and the plan identifies some specific approaches and places where those interventions would be effective. Our fifth and last goal, supporting and enhancing the quality of life in Bucksport. Lisa mentioned and discussed the workforce neighborhood, and you see there to the right an image that's somewhat representative of what's envisioned for that particular area. Again, maintaining some of the forest areas, but adding quality single-family homes. The plan also discusses ways to encourage mixed use and senior housing. Again, those are community needs, but housing in general, is kind of a blended area between, what is needed by the community and what's needed for economic development. The jobs are great, but those workers need places to live. And there's an example of a mixed-use type of building there on the bottom image. Extending the waterfront walkway trail, I think Lisa's discussed that, and that's the whole idea of stitching together the project area, not only the different uses within the project area, but stitching together the project area with the waterfront and Main Street area of Bucksport. And creating a co-working center here is the last one. Co-working centers, if you're not familiar, it's a shared office environment where essentially anyone can walk in and rent space for the day and have access to Wi-Fi and printers. And we think that there's a real opportunity and need for this, and this is something that would enhance the community of Bucksport. One of the things that this allows is contractors that may be working with Whole Oceans or other businesses that have a need for short-term office space, which is often common with these types of large developments. You have different groups and folks coming in and needing temporary office space. But this would also be for local residents, local entrepreneurs, and students as well. And this would involve tapping into the 3-ring binder broadband network, which the plan also discusses. So I'm going to turn this back over to Lisa to talk a little bit more about how we implement all of these ideas.
So when we talked in the beginning that you see we have public engagement, we have an analysis of the existing conditions, we have a series of recommendations, but how do we do it? So this is a lot. This is a lot to throw at you. We encourage you, again, there's some handouts down here and outside to take with you home and then sign on so you can read the plan. There's much more detail than we can give you in an hour of doing this. So with all of that, how do we get it done? And these are important pieces. And the big piece of this is growing capacity and working with partners. You know, you heard from Amy Jean from the EPA. You heard from Mike Ludwig from Eastern Maine Development Corporation, two huge partners in this area. Amy Jean mentioned a number of grants that were given, not just to Bucksport, but to the region in Hancock County. That's tremendous. And then EMDC has a whole host of resources and have been here helping Bucksport all along the way. Bucksport itself as a community is very adept at getting grants as well. And in the plan, there are probably 4 or 5 pages of different types of federal resources that can be sought after, state resources, regional resources that can be sought after to help implement these recommendations. And by the way, having this plan, you know, literally in hand will help Sue and Rich and Eastern Maine Development Corporation obtain those resources, because granting agencies want to see that a community has gone through a process like this and has thought through their needs, concerns, issues, ideas, and have documented that through a public process. And once you do that, and you can prove to them by literally photocopying pages out of this report and putting it into grant application, your chances of receiving federal money, this area plan is one of 19 in the country, you know, and Mike shared a story over earlier today that he was using some of the reports and the things that Heart and Soul was doing, Bucksport Neck was doing to get this grant. This is going to continue on. That is a very important document to do that, to continue on. So how does it happen? So those are grant resources, but what's the sort of infrastructure in the community to get this done? And our A.D.A.P.T. Committee that we had, we're recommending to continue that and rename them the A.D.A.P.T. Implementation Committee, where they would meet, you know, perhaps once a quarter or twice a year and sort of have a checklist of elements in terms of how are we doing, how's the report card, what should we be going after, what grant resources are out there, what are the town's priorities, what are the town's needs, what's Eastern Maine Development doing. There's a lot of moving parts, and this committee can help work and continue to implement this plan by paying attention to those moving parts and keep this moving forward together. Rich is great. You guys are so lucky to have him. As Susan said, you know, it's wonderful. We've worked very, very closely with Rich through this whole process, but he's one guy. And we're really recommending a support position in the economic development realm of the community. That could help market the community, so sort of a marketing plan. It can help with industry and business attraction. So if those similar industries that are supportive of whole oceans come in and they say, who do I go to? You know, you can certainly go to Rich, but it'd be helpful if he had others. And this development support position can also help write those grants. That person can use this report to help grants. Rich is, you know, we're here in June and he's helping put in the marina to get in the water, and then half an hour later, he's meeting somebody to go to the Heritage Industrial Park and show him an available site. That's the, you know, the range of what he's doing. And so we're really seeing the need to support that position and support him to really make this plan successful. The next thing is the Local Development Corporation. This is something that the town actually has. So the plan talks about reconstituting that Local Development Corporation or creating a new one. You can do the A.D.A.P.T. LDC is the acronym. Planners tend to use a lot of acronyms. But the Local Development Corporation. Local development corporations are really nice because they're a little bit separate from the town council. They have some autonomy and some different powers that a town government doesn't have. A local development corporation, for instance, could acquire property, redevelop, help redevelop it and sell it, or acquire it, sell property. They can also, local development corporations might be eligible for different kinds of grants that the town might not be able to get also. So there's a whole host of areas that this local development corporation could help, and it would be very complementary to the town economic development position, and then the A.D.A.P.T. Implementation Committee could work with this local development corporation. So there's sort of a method to this madness in terms of these recommendations. And then we talked about the Eastern Maine Development Corporation resources, and Mike mentioned some of those earlier. He's got a whole team of people behind him that travel all throughout their region. They're headquartered in Bangor. We met with them and did a stakeholder meeting very early in this process to understand the resources, whether it's workforce training, small business development resources, brownfield redevelopment resources, the list goes on, and they're a great partner in terms of their resources. I talked about, okay, step 2, we have to find the money, right? Money, I wish grew on trees, it doesn't. But we talked about the grants, and you can see the report for the numerous grant opportunities. And we talked about EMDC, but we also talked about a tax increment financing and implementation fund. And the town actually has a TIF, is the acronym here, and they used the TIF on Main Street before. Dan actually ran an analysis, and we're not going to get into the weeds of this right now given the hour and the time, but where it's in the report where Dan has said, okay, if we redevelop the property's being taxed at this level. If we redevelop the property's, I'm oversimplifying, is going to be taxed at this level. So we're going to generate a certain amount of revenue for the town, but we're going to keep the taxes, perhaps here. And so the taxes come back to the community, and then those resources can be used within the TIF district, which is our A.D.A.P.T project area. So this is a way that can raise money, if you will, to help implement this plan, a real way to raise money to help implement this plan. Not every state, New York doesn't really embrace this concept of a TIF, but Maine does, and there's many communities in Maine doing this, and it's a great way to generate real dollars to implement, dedicated to the implementation of this plan. And then the third step, and in the implementation chapter of the report, is what we call the guide, or the implementation chapter. And these are also out. There's multiple pages in the report of this table, and they're out on the easels when we're done. I'm just going to orient you to it. So the goals at the top, so this is a sample page, which is to catalyze a diverse and resilient economic growth in the town and region. And we have the recommendation, we have a time frame, should it happen immediately, in the medium term, or the long term? What's the priority? A low priority, a medium priority, or a high priority? Who's the project champion? That's probably the most important column, because we have to identify somebody who's going to spearhead this effort. And without a project champion, nothing's going to move forward. But the project champion can't act alone, so we add the next column, which are project partners. And this is where we list all kinds of people, private and public sectors, that can work with the project champion to get this done. And then, in addition to the pages of resources that precede these in the report, we match those resources to the very specific recommendation. So if nothing else, that A.D.A.P.T implementation committee can take these 4 or 5 pages from the report in and of themselves and have that as their roadmap. Because everything that we just talked about is listed in these reports with a time frame, a priority level, and a project champion, and some potential funding sources as we move forward. So these pages become, in effect, a kind of an executive summary of how to move forward as we proceed. So that was a lot. It's about an hour, sorry, 40 minutes. We're going to have Susan Lessard just provide some final comments, and then we're happy to take some questions, and then we'll retire to the board. So I'm going to ask Susan to close, and then we'll do some questions.
Raise this a little bit. And so I'm going to end my portion of this evening in the same way that I started it, and that is by thanking each and every one of you for coming tonight and to learn more about this plan, and to remind you that while this is the end of one process, it's really the beginning of another, because the real work lies ahead. And as we work as a community with our partners, and I'm not going to list part, because the list is very long and I'll leave somebody out, number one. And number two is because anyone who wants to help is welcome. And this plan is not a set-in-stone document that says A, B, C, D. This is a roadmap of the ideas and visions that people shared to create this. And some will like some and some will like others, but the roadmap allows us to move forward with some sense of knowledge of what the community wants and with a way to get there. But what will be most important is that everyone continue to help. One of the biggest strengths of Bucksport that I have found, and I've done this work for a long time, that's most impressive to me is people show up, stand up, come back, always, to make things better here. And there's so many good things here. There have been good things here for a very long time in a very big shadow. And they've all emerged now, but we have more good things coming. Whole Oceans is major, and Maine Maritime is major, and a stabilized power generation facility is major. But they're all connected to all of the other things that are here, the arts community and the downtown and the business park and our strong educational system, RSU 25. So I'm talking more than I should, but I tend to do that because I'm excited about moving forward. This community has such a strong history of planning, and you know what that's done for you. And so here's more planning, but next is make it happen. And I'm confident that everyone working together with all our partners, and our partners are defined only by the limit of how many people want to help, that we can turn this plan into a reality. And everywhere I go, and I'm asked to speak frequently about Bucksport because you're a role model for communities, and communities from the outside want to know how you do what you do. And I end most of those talks with the same thing, which is Bucksport is alive and well, and it's embracing its future with open arms. And that's where I'll end this evening. Thank you. But if there are questions, we'll attempt to answer those, and then there's out in the... Sure.
A suggestion maybe. On the far side of the road, as you're going toward backward, that part up here that used to be for junk and everything would make a wonderful place for solar panels. And I think because electrical stuff we're going to have going on there, that maybe we could do that.
Yeah, we actually, thank you. Maybe talk about the landfill area? Yeah, so the landfill is going to continue to be operated by AIM, but in the report, we do suggest when it is capped and no longer used, to use that area for solar panels. Yep.
Okay, I'll stay there.
Yes, David.
I'm David Key, member of the town council, for a few more years, so that's like a big town. And I wonder if there was any thought given to the burying the power lines in town. I mean, when you've been to a town, you say, oh, it's a beautiful town, and then you realize there's no power lines on it. Was there any thought given to that in the discussion of the various items you discussed?
I don't know if we have that specifically in the report. I'm looking at Dan, because there's a lot in the report.
We included as part of the Main Street corridor improvement project. There's quite a few recommendations in there, and I believe we do mention various power lines, because to your point, that is, if you're going to undertake a project like that, and you are, extending.
I can repeat, or you can, yeah. So the question, did you hear the question? I'll repeat the question. So the question was, is there any consideration of burying power lines on Main Street, especially if we were redoing sidewalks, et cetera? And the answer is yes, because we talk about sort of a holistic, what we call the streetscape or the redo of Main Street. And if you're going to undertake any reconstruction activities along Main Street, if it's possible, it's not always possible because the utilities don't always want to bury their lines, but the request would be made to perhaps bury the power lines as you undertake any activities along Main Street. Sure.
You mentioned that the port facility would be enhanced as a priority, and you mentioned some bulk, exporting of bulk aggregate materials. I don't really understand what that means. Could you give some examples of these bulk aggregate materials, and do they currently exist, and if so, how are they currently being exported?
There are a number of ways of handling aggregate. Aggregate can be gravel, it can be wood chips, it can be, it's small pieces of some specific material, but there are methods for containerized aggregate, which is, allows the collection, storage, and shipping of them, but containerized as opposed to open piles of them on a site, which was kind of what we were talking about initially. But aggregate is, for the most part, it is some stone, gravel, wood chips, those kind of things. It's that kind of material. But the methodology of how it's transported by container or in open cargo is the discussion, but in our discussion we talked about containerized aggregate being a shipping, a potential product. We were a part of the Economic Development Advisory Team review from the federal government for the Maine forest products industry, and the assets of this site, including rail, if improved, and deep water that could allow for shipping, is attractive to segments of the forest products industry for the export of some products. Yes?
First of all, in response to that particular question, I wonder if we have the infrastructure to handle the transport of those kind of aggregates or whatever it is that's moving in and out of this town to handle that. And secondly, and this is a very different thought, I look at this whole plan and I commend you on the idea of keeping things flexible, because this isn't locked in. As we move forward, things change. I can see these things changing in our digital world and all that. And I'm a little bit concerned about the thought of how do we attract folks to come into this town that have a wide variety of ways of focusing on solutions to various things. I haven't heard anything about attracting new thoughts into the community.
Attracting new thoughts. Well, new people bring new thoughts, and even those who've been around a while have been known to come up with a few new ones. But I think the idea is talking about preserving what makes Bucksport is in many ways related to the work that Heart and Soul did to identify what the people of the community care about in a positive way that they want to retain. And that doesn't mean that you lock anyone else out of things. It's an open and embracing thought, but it also means that you don't necessarily turn this community into something else in order to develop it, because there are so many things about the community that are special and good. People coming in can embrace those, and new ideas can enhance them. But I haven't heard and I've only been here 3 years, I've never heard anyone say they wanted Bucksport to be something else. I've heard a lot about people wanting Bucksport to be healthy and vibrant and welcoming and diverse. Many of the things it is, but I guess, Chris, I'm a little confused by new ideas. The whole planning process has been geared towards listening to what people want.
But in the process of being listening, you also need to be open to the world at large. And that's happening all around us. And I agree with you. I see a lot of stuff going on, particularly in the state of Maine, going up the coast. I see a lot of stuff happening that you don't want to happen. But somehow you need to have an open mind to things that are going on around us. That I'm not trying to say, hey, we want everything to be different. But I see a little inkling of it with the Maine Maritime Academy thing. And I see a little inkling of it down on the waterfront with the art kind of stuff. But I'm not kind of, there was a little tiny bit about housing for elderly people. But I somehow, in this whole invitation of going somewhere, we need to let it be known that we are open to new ideas. That it isn't just what we put out in stone. And I say that because you've also made a big point of the fact that this isn't locked in stone. But I think we need to, emphasize a little bit more that we are flexible.
One thing too, when you take a look at the plan, and there's so much in here after a year and a half to try to share, but there are significant recommendations that look to the whole community. And when we started this project, it was just the A.D.A.P.T site, but then Whole Oceans came in and we were like, okay, great, now what does this mean for the whole community? And we were able to really kind of expand our scope of what we were looking at, to really look at the whole community, to look at the housing needs, to look at Main Street, to look at the waterfront, to look at opportunities in the region. And if Whole Oceans hadn't come in, our charge, we'd be sitting here saying, well, we think, these 5 industries could come to the A.D.A.P.T website based on the A.D.A.P.T project site, based on our research. But Whole Oceans really gave us, the community of Bucksport, to be able to look beyond just our project area and say, what are the opportunities for this community? What are the needs and what are the opportunities? We even looked at the industrial park on the other end of town, clearly not in our project area. So I think, while it doesn't maybe specifically state what you're saying, I think the tenor of this report gets to what you're saying. It's Bucksport, it's the region. There are opportunities that don't stop at the edge of our, I can't remember now, was it 274 acres that we've originally started studying. And we ended up, and there's a sort of what we call a framework plan in the report that looks at the interrelationships of all of these aspects of the community. And we're so fortunate that we were able to expand our scope and our look at the community to come up with those types of recommendations.
Yes.
Sorry, let me answer your question. I'm the chief producer of Whole Oceans. My experience as a farmer is to bring in a lot of skill sets, very, very disciplined skill sets. Those skill sets tend to have partners. Those partners have something to do with it. You find they generate a grant
aquaculture. And those are the kinds of things that go in the shop.
Those people in general, all the aspects of talking behind more, they have to, and the community is going to do it.
Any questions?
Yes.
What's the plan for the biomass oil? Is that coming out? I noticed in some of your drawings, you got 3 or 4 stacks, and in this one, you got a single stack. Is that just the gas turbine, or is that the biomass part of the operation down there that's left?
It's my understanding that within a relatively short time, AIM will be making decisions on the future of that asset and whether it remains on that site, based on the fact that it's outsized for the type of production that, or use, and the fact that they are adding some other generating capacity to the site and removing some, and I'm not sure, but within a relatively short time period, AIM will be discussing the future of that asset and whether or not it remains on the site. Any other questions? If not, thank you all again, and there's some boards out there. Please take a look, please pick up information, and please help. Thank you.